Hello, Michelle again. So today we're going to talk more about faunal analysis, and we're going to focus on looking at some of the characteristics and differences that allow us to tell if bones archaeologically come from fish or birds or snakes or mammals. And so I'm going to show you some bones that come from my reference collection. So the reference collection is animals that died for some reason. They might be roadkill, it might be something else that we collected and then defleshed. So we have the bones out of the animal, but we know what animal it came from. And so this first one is a catfish, so fish. And we've got the vertebrae, and you can see those spines that come off the side. Usually the spines are broken archaeologically, they're really delicate. But you can see that middle part, that vertebral body, we find a lot of those. People in this region were eating a lot of fish. It was very wet here. So you can see that it's concave on both sides. We find a lot of fish vertebrae like that. And so then we can tell that it came from a fish, maybe a catfish, maybe another fish. But we also sometimes find other pieces of fish too, but fish bone is pretty thin and pretty delicate. So you can look at this, see how thin it is. There's pieces that are almost see-through. But what's cool about the reference collection is that if we find bone and we go, that's a weird looking piece, not sure what it is, but we can pull our reference collection out and see if we can match it to anything. And if we can, then we can say, okay, yeah, well, that's definitely from a catfish. It looks just like that catfish bone. And if it doesn't, we might say, well, it still kind of looks like a fish bone. We're just not exactly sure which exact fish it came from. Or we might be able to say, oh, this doesn't look like any kind of fish bone that we have in our sample, so it's likely not fish. So from there, let's switch over to birds. So we've got a bird vertebrae to start out. And you can see it's much different than the fish vertebrae. It's much more complicated. There are many more details to it. So it's easy to tell the difference when you see something like this archaeologically versus that fish. And then birds, again, they have to fly. So they're very light. Their bones are very thin. So this is the skull of a duck. And holding it, you can barely feel it. It's so light. And long bones, also of birds, are very thin. So when you look at a cross section, the bone part is very, very thin, and there's a lot of hollow space. And then you've got the pelvis of a duck, which again, very, very thin and light, and very different from a mammal. But you can see right here, that's where the femur rests. So that's the hip of the bird. So then moving on to snake, we've got snake vertebrae here. And again, it's similar to the bird, but it's convex on one side and then concave on the other. So that's kind of a characteristic you can look for. And then snakes are essentially ribs and vertebrae. So that's pretty much what you're gonna expect to find. That's my whole bag of snake is just that. I don't have the skull of this guy. And then last, we've got mammals, obviously, and mammals I've got represented today by a raccoon. And so the first piece, this is the pelvis of a raccoon, or half of it, and you can see how different it is from that bird. And this is where the femur fits in on the pelvis there, so that's the hip of the raccoon. And yeah, like I said, very different from that bird. So if we find this versus that, we can very much say, oh yeah, we've got a mammal. And then I've got the vertebrae. And this is a young raccoon, so there would be a flatter piece that would be fused onto this vertebrae, but it's not fused because this is a young raccoon. But again, you can see this is a much more complicated and bigger vertebrae piece. This is where the spinal cord goes through. So if we're seeing vertebrae more like this, then we think more of mammal. And then we can go to this reference collection, look at raccoons. We've got some rabbits, we've got dogs. We can compare them and see which species we've got a vertebrae from archaeologically. And then this is just a long bone, just an example, this is a femur. And if we have a whole thing like this, we can tell if it's from the right or left side of the animal. We can start to talk about the age of the animal. But usually we don't find this whole thing, we'll just find like a midsection. But there are some characteristics on long bones that might be able to tell you what species the bone came from, even if you just have a section of it. But if you have one end or the other end, then you can really start to make a lot of conclusions about what bone this came from archaeologically, even if you don't have the whole thing. And then mammals as well, obviously, skulls. And we don't often find the whole skull. Skulls are pretty delicate. You can see all those sutures in there. They break pretty easily. But teeth stick around archaeologically for a long time. So we've got a lot of raccoon teeth actually from the site, Richards Bridge, that we've been working on. And deer teeth as well. But teeth, even if they fall out of the skull or out of the mandible, which is the jaw part, they stick around for a long time, so we can tell we've got a number of teeth there. And then you can look at the wear on the teeth to start to tell how old the animal might have been. And so we'll talk a little bit more about aging animals next week, but I just wanted to give you kind of that brief overview, what we're looking for, just as a general starting to sort our archaeological collections and samples, and then just sorting them into general species or type of animal, and then we'll go into more detail next week, like I said, about aging and looking a little more detail at some of the different bones. So I'll see you then. Have a good day, and see you next week.